Before there was a United States, the people who built this country lived without a single thing we now consider essential. No electricity, no running water, no store within a day's ride, no doctor, no power company, no government program of any kind. The colonial homestead was a world unto itself, producing its own food, its own cloth, its own medicine, its own tools, and its own shelter. And here's the strange truth. Many of the very skills that built America have since been buried under building codes and regulations that would make the founders' own homes illegal to construct today. Here is what the history books gloss over. The colonial family was not primitive. They were masters of 100 crafts that the modern person cannot perform at all, holding in their hands and heads the entire knowledge required to sustain human life from raw materials. Number 16 on this list built warm, lasting homes from nothing but the earth and trees on the land. Number 9 turned a field of flax into the shirts on the family's backs. These 25 hacks weren't lost because they failed. They built a nation. They were lost because we handed every one of these skills to a factory and a store and forgot we ever knew them. Before we start, hit subscribe because this is the foundational knowledge of America and it is vanishing. What you are about to learn built this country. Let us count down. Number 25. The timber frame house raised by hand. Your colonial ancestors built homes that have stood for 300 years, hewing massive beams from the forest with broadaxe and adze, cutting precise mortise and tenon joints, and raising the whole frame in a single day with the help of every neighbor. No nails held the structure, only wooden pegs and the genius of the joinery. The community gathered for the raising, the frame went up, and everyone left fed. A family had a solid home within a season using nothing but timber, skill, and many willing hands. Number 24. The central hearth and cooking fire. The heart of the colonial home was the great fireplace, and your ancestors knew how to build and use it as kitchen, furnace, and gathering place all at once. Your colonial grandmother cooked entire meals over the open fire and in the brick oven beside it, managing a dozen pots at different heights and temperatures, baking bread in the residual heat after the coals were raked out. The skill of cooking over live fire, judging the heat by hand and eye, was a daily mastery that fed the family in every season. Number 23. Open-hearth bread and the brick oven. First pattern break. Bread was life, and your colonial grandmother baked it weekly in a brick oven she fired with wood until the bricks glowed, then swept clean and loaded with loaves to bake in the stored heat. She judged the temperature by holding her hand inside or watching how fast a sprinkle of flour browned. From that single firing she baked bread, then pies, then puddings, then dried fruit, using the falling heat in stages so not a bit of the fire's energy was wasted. It was a science learned entirely by feel. Number 22. Salting, smoking, and barreling meat. With no refrigeration, your colonial ancestors preserved their meat by salting it down in barrels, smoking it in the chimney or smokehouse, and packing it in brine, methods that kept pork and beef edible for a year or more. The autumn slaughter was a major event, and the whole family worked to preserve every part of the animal before winter. The salt barrel and the smokehouse were as essential to survival as the harvest itself, and the knowledge of curing was held by every household. Number 21. Churning butter and making cheese. The family cow gave milk that your colonial grandmother transformed into butter and cheese, preserving the milk's nourishment in forms that lasted. She skimmed the cream, churned it by hand into butter, and worked the milk into cheeses that aged in the cool of the cellar. Nothing was wasted, the buttermilk drunk or baked with, the whey fed to the hogs. This daily dairy work turned the cow's gift into food that carried the family far beyond the day it was milked. Number 20. Brewing small beer and cider. Second pattern break. Water was often unsafe to drink, so your colonial family brewed small beer, a low-alcohol drink safe for the whole household including children, and pressed apples into cider that fermented and kept through the winter. Your colonial grandmother brewed regularly as part of the household routine, and the cider barrel in the cellar was a staple of every farm. These fermented drinks were not luxuries, but daily necessities, providing safe hydration and preserved calories in an age before clean municipal water. Number 19. Tallow candles and rushlights. The colonial night was lit by light the family made themselves, and your colonial grandmother dipped or molded candles from the tallow rendered from their own animals, or made simple rushlights by soaking dried rushes in fat. Candle making was a regular chore, often done in batches that lit the home for months. The light was precious and used sparingly. The family's day shaped around the sun, but the knowledge of making light from the fat of their own livestock meant they were never left in total darkness. Number 18. Soap from ashes and fat. Your colonial grandmother made the family's soap from two waste products: the fat saved from cooking and butchering, and the lye leached from the ashes of the hearth fire. She boiled them together in a great kettle until they transformed into soap for washing the body, the clothes, and the home. It cost nothing but the saving of scraps and the labor of the boiling, and the knowledge of how to judge the lye and the fat to get good soap was a standard skill of every colonial housewife. Number 17. Spinning thread from wool and flax. Third pattern break. The cloth that clothed the colonial family began as raw wool from the sheep and flax from the field, and your colonial grandmother and her daughters spun it into thread on the spinning wheel through the long winter evenings. This was constant, skilled work, the wheel humming in nearly every home, turning the farm's own fiber into the thread that would become every garment, blanket, and sheet the family owned. A girl learned to spin young, and the term spinster comes from this very work. Number 16. Weaving cloth on the loom. The spun thread was woven into cloth on the household loom, and your colonial ancestors produced their own linen, wool, and linsey-woolsey for every textile need. The loom was a large and valued possession, and weaving was a demanding craft that turned thread into fabric inch by careful inch. From this homemade cloth came the family's clothing, bedding, and household linens, all of it produced from raw fiber by the labor and skill of the household, with nothing bought from any merchant. Number 15. Sewing, mending, and making every garment. With cloth so precious and hard-won, your colonial grandmother sewed every garment by hand and mended them endlessly, passing clothing down from child to child and reworking it until nothing usable remained. There was no buying a new shirt. Every stitch was made at home, and the skill of cutting, sewing, and altering clothing was essential to keeping the family clothed. Worn-out cloth became quilts, then rags, then was saved for paper. Nothing was ever simply thrown away. Number 14. Tanning leather and making shoes. Your colonial ancestors tanned the hides of their animals into leather and worked it into shoes, harness, and goods of every kind. The tanning was a long, smelly process using bark and lime, but it turned a raw hide into durable, useful material. The family cobbler, often a traveling craftsman or a skilled member of the household, shaped that leather into the shoes that carried everyone through the year. Leather was too valuable to waste, and the knowledge of working it was widespread. Number 13. Blacksmithing and tool repair. The colonial homestead depended on iron tools, and your colonial ancestors either kept a forge themselves or relied on the village smith to make and mend the hardware of daily life: the hinges, nails, knives, hoes, and horseshoes. Many a farmer could do his own basic smithing, heating, and shaping iron to repair what broke. In a world where every tool was made by hand and could not simply be replaced from a store, the ability to work and mend iron was a foundation of survival. Number 12. Making the household's own tools and furniture. Beyond iron, your colonial ancestors crafted their own wooden tools, furniture, barrels, baskets, and containers from the timber of their land. The farmer was also a carpenter, cooper, and woodworker, shaping handles, building chairs and tables, and weaving baskets for every purpose. The cooper's barrels stored the family's food and drink, the handmade furniture filled the home, and all of it came from the woods and the skilled hands of the household, bought from no one. Number 11. Growing and grinding the family's grain. Your colonial family grew their own grain and either ground it at the local mill or, in remote places, by hand, turning their wheat, rye, and corn into the flour and meal that was the foundation of every meal. The harvest was cut by hand with sickle and scythe, threshed on the barn floor, and winnowed in the wind. The bread on the table traced back through every step to the seed planted in their own field, a chain of labor entirely within the family's control. The forgetting came as the factory and the store slowly took over each of these crafts. Cloth came from mills, soap and candles from shops, tools and furniture from catalogs, until the family that once made everything made nothing at all. building codes eventually made the founders' own methods of construction illegal. A nation built by people who could do everything became a nation of people who can do almost nothing for themselves, and it happened across just a few generations. Here is your challenge. Pick one, just one. Learn to bake bread from scratch in a real oven. Try making a batch of soap or candles from tallow. Learn one craft your ancestors took for granted. Tell me in the comments which one you'll try, and tell me how far back your family goes in this country, because somebody in your family tree knew every skill on this list. That knowledge did not die. It just went quiet. It is time to start listening again.